Have you ever walked into a room and felt, before you even spoke a word, that people had already decided you didn't belong? Imagine carrying all your skills, your dignity, your quiet strength, yet being reduced to a stereotype because of the color of your skin or the clothes you wear. This is the reality Malcolm Price faced when he went undercover in his own company. They mocked him, humiliated him, and even spilled coffee on him just to watch him clean it up. They believed he was powerless. But what they didn't know was that the man they scorned was their future CEO, the one who would hold their careers in his hands the very next day. Now, here's the choice that echoes beyond his story when faced with injustice. Do we stay silent to protect ourselves, or do we speak, even if it costs us everything? If you were in Malcolm's shoes, what would you do? This story is not just about revenge, it's about dignity, courage, and the quiet power of respect. Stay with us, and let's walk through this unforgettable journey together. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss stories that move the heart and challenge the mind. The lobby of Harbor Stone Realty gleamed like a cathedral of glass and chrome. Every morning, the revolving doors spilled out a stream of employees in polished leather shoes, clutching designer briefcases, sipping lattes that cost more than some people's lunches. To outsiders, this company represented success, wealth, and power. But beneath the shine, not everyone was treated with equal respect. On this particular morning, a young man in a faded hoodie pushed through those same glass doors. His sneakers were scuffed, his backpack worn, and his dark skin immediately made him stand out in a sea of tailored suits. He didn't walk like someone desperate for a job. He walked with quiet confidence, but no one in that lobby knew who he truly was. This was Malcolm Price. He wasn't just any man wandering into the building. He was the firstborn son of Richard Price, the white billionaire founder of Harbor Stone. Malcolm had built his own life abroad, far away from this empire. But rumors had reached him, rumors of discrimination, whispers of minorities pushed down, voices silenced, careers stalled because of color and class. Malcolm didn't want to inherit a company rotting from within. He wanted to see it with his own eyes. And so, he came back to Dallas, not in a limousine, not in a tailored suit, but disguised as a nobody, a janitor. The day hadn't even properly started when the first blow landed. "Are you blind?" Malcolm. The sharp voice cut across the polished floor like a whip. A woman in a crisp blouse and pencil skirt stormed over. Her ID badge read Karen Doyle, janitorial supervisor, tall, blonde, with a permanent scowl carved into her face. She carried herself like the queen of the building, and today she had found her prey. Malcolm had just finished wiping down the long glass conference table near the lobby. The surface gleamed under the chandeliers, spotless, reflective like a mirror. But Karen stopped, narrowed her eyes, and grabbed a paper cup of coffee still steaming in her hand. Without a word of warning, she flung the entire contents across the table. The dark liquid splattered violently, dripping down the sides, pooling onto the floor. Gasps echoed from a few employees passing by. Karen folded her arms, tilting her chin up, and barked. "Now clean it again." For a moment, silence fell heavy. Malcolm stood with the rag still in his hand, his dark eyes steady on the mess. His jaw tightened just slightly, but he didn't flinch. He didn't snap back. He didn't reveal the truth. Instead, he took a breath, crouched down, and began wiping the coffee as if nothing had happened. Inside, though, His thoughts were burning. This is how you treat people you think are beneath you. My mother scrubbed floors to keep me fed, and I swore I would never forget her dignity. And now, here I am, disguised as her, watching history repeat itself. Karen smirked, satisfied, and strutted away. To her, this was nothing a petty display of authority, a reminder of who held the power. To Malcolm, it was confirmation. The rot wasn't a rumor, it was alive. And as he bent to clean the sticky puddle, a small detail caught his eye. A group of suited employees stood a few feet away, watching. Some chuckled under their breath, shaking their heads as if this humiliation were entertainment. Others stayed quiet, glancing quickly away, pretending not to notice. Only one young woman, a secretary with tired eyes, hesitated. She shifted as if to help, but then froze, her courage faltering under the weight of everyone else's silence. Malcolm memorized her face. He also memorized every single smirk, every turned back, because tomorrow they would all know exactly who he was. That night, back in the small apartment he had rented under a fake name, Malcolm wrote notes in a leather journal. He scribbled details of each person he encountered. The way Karen barked orders. The way a middle manager named Brent Lawson sneered when he saw Malcolm using the staff elevator. The way security guards waved white employees through but stopped him twice to check his badge. Each insult, each slight, he recorded not because they hurt him personally, but because they revealed the truth about his company, his inheritance. He paused, staring at the page, and thought of his late mother. He could still picture her hands, cracked from bleach and soap, folding his small fingers into hers as she whispered, "Son, don't let the world make you bitter. Let it make you better." That voice steadied him. Tomorrow would be the reckoning, but for now, he would stay in disguise. Back in the office the next morning, Malcolm tied the strings of his janitor's uniform tighter, picked up the mop, and stepped into the marble hallway. All ready, Brent was waiting for him with a smirk. Well, looks like we've got ourselves a permanent cleaning boy," Brent said, dropping a wad of napkins onto the floor deliberately. "Better get used to it. Around here, people like you should know their place." Malcolm bent down, picked up the napkins slowly, and looked Brent in the eye. His voice was calm, low, and steady. "Is that so?" Brent smirked wider, mistaking calm for weakness. "That's right. And trust me, no one in this company is ever going to take orders from someone like you." Malcolm nodded once, almost like he was agreeing. But inside, he was already imagining the look on Brent's face tomorrow when the truth came out. Because tomorrow, the janitor would stand at the front of the room, not as a nobody but as their new CEO. And then, everyone would understand. Malcolm Price sat in the small kitchen of his rented apartment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound filling the room. He hadn't lived in a place this modest since his 20s, back when he was still chasing scholarships and juggling 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. On the countertop sat a chipped coffee mug, half full and cooling fast. He didn't mind the simplicity. In fact, he welcomed it. It reminded him why he was here. When people thought of Harbor Stone Realty, they thought of wealth, of skyscrapers stamped with the company logo, of gated communities sprouting across Texas suburbs. They didn't think of the janitors scrubbing marble floors at midnight or the receptionists whose names no one ever bothered to remember. They didn't think of the hidden stories, the discrimination whispered in break rooms. Malcolm knew those stories existed. He had heard them for years, passed along in careful, cautious tones from family friends or through online reviews quickly buried under corporate PR. Now he was seeing them with his own eyes. He closed his journal and leaned back. His reflection stared at him from the kitchen window, dark skin, tired but steady eyes, a face that carried both his father's sharp jawline and his mother's quiet resilience. His late mother, Denise Price, had been the grounding force of his life. She wasn't part of the glamorous world Richard Price inhabited. She had scrubbed hospital floors for a living, her hands always raw from bleach, but her dignity never broken. Denise had raised Malcolm to understand both the ugliness and the strength of being overlooked. And now, even years after her passing, Malcolm carried her voice inside him. He remembered one night in particular. He was maybe 12. Denise had come home late, still in her cleaning uniform, exhaustion written across her face. He had asked her why she never complained, why she kept showing up to a job where people didn't even look her in the eye. She had smiled and said, "Because, baby, my worth isn't defined by how they see me. It's defined by how I see myself. And one day, you're going to build something where people like me don't get treated like shadows." That promise had stayed with him. When Richard called a month ago and told him it was time to step into leadership, Malcolm had hesitated. It wasn't that he doubted his ability. He had built companies abroad, advised global firms, proven himself countless times. What he doubted was Harbor Stone itself. What good was inheriting an empire if it was poisoned from within? So he came undercover, a mop in hand instead of a briefcase, to see the truth. The truth had not disappointed. Karen Doyle's sneer, Brent Lawson's mockery, the uncomfortable silence of the bystanders. All of it was exactly what he had feared and worse. As the sun climbed higher outside his window, Malcolm rubbed his temples. Tomorrow, his father would arrive at the office to announce the new CEO. Tomorrow, the mask would drop. But tonight, Malcolm allowed himself a rare moment of vulnerability. Am I ready for this, he wondered? Not just to run a company, but to confront a culture that has been allowed to rot for years. What if they don't accept me? What if the board resists? He thought of Brent's words echoing in the hallway. No one in this company is ever going to take orders from someone like you. Malcolm clenched his jaw. He had heard that same tone his whole life, from a teacher who once doubted his college application, from a banker who assumed he needed a co-signer despite having perfect credit, from strangers in airports, in restaurants, in boardrooms. Always the same assumption that his presence was an exception, never the rule. But his mother's words rose again, steadying him. Don't let the world make you bitter. Let it make you better. He whispered into the quiet kitchen. I'll be better, Mom, and I'll make them better too. The next morning, the office of Harbor Stone buzzed with its usual hum of ambition. Phones rang, shoes clicked on marble floors, voices echoed from glass-walled conference rooms. Malcolm, in his janitor's uniform, slipped through unnoticed except when someone needed a mess cleaned. He had become invisible, and invisibility was a powerful vantage point. He lingered near the elevators where a group of young associates clustered. Their conversation wasn't about clients or market trends. It was about him. You see the new janitor, one whispered, smirking. Guy looks like he came off a construction site. Bet he doesn't last a week. Another laughed, adding, Karen's already got him running like a dog. Poor guy doesn't know what he signed up for. Malcolm's mop glided across the floor as if he hadn't heard a word, but inside he filed away their names and faces. He didn't need to punish everyone, but he needed to know who laughed, who stayed silent, and who might surprise him by doing the right thing. Later, as he was emptying trash bins near the executive wing, he overheard Brent bragging to a colleague. "Price is coming tomorrow," Brent said, his voice dripping with anticipation. "Richard's making some big announcement. If anyone's getting promoted, it's going to be me. You'll see. Nobody runs operations smoother than I do. Doyle and I. We've been keeping this place spotless for years. Management loves loyalty." The irony nearly made Malcolm laugh. Spotless, he thought. You call humiliation spotless. You call arrogance loyalty, but outwardly, he stayed quiet, head bowed, rolling the trash cart down the hall. Brent didn't even glance his way. That night, Malcolm sat on the edge of his bed, his journal open again. He sketched out 2 columns, one titled Silence and the other Courage. Under Silence, he listed names of employees who had laughed or looked away. Under Courage, only one name appeared: Emily Chen, the secretary who had almost stepped forward when Karen threw the coffee. She hadn't spoken much, but Malcolm had seen the conflict in her eyes. That flicker of decency mattered. Malcolm closed the journal and looked out the window. Dallas shimmered under the night sky. Towers of glass lit up like beacons. Somewhere in one of those towers, tomorrow, everything would change. He exhaled slowly. "This isn't just about me," he reminded himself. "It's about everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. About building a company where respect isn't a luxury, but the foundation." For the first time that week, he allowed himself a small smile. Tomorrow, the janitor would disappear, the CEO would arrive, and the empire of Harbor Stone would never be the same again. Malcolm arrived at the Harbor Stone headquarters before sunrise. The downtown Dallas skyline still wrapped in the faint blue of early morning. The glass tower reflected the first streaks of light as he pushed through the revolving doors, wearing the same faded uniform and carrying the same mop bucket. His cover was intact. To the security guard at the front desk, to the receptionist yawning behind a latte, he was just another janitor starting another shift. That anonymity was both a shield and a mirror, shielding him from pretense and mirroring the way so many employees were treated here unseen. The lobby was pristine at first glance, polished marble floors and chandeliers glinting above. But Malcolm had learned quickly that what gleamed on the surface often masked what rotted underneath. He moved quietly through the corridors, his steps echoing in spaces designed to impress investors, not protect workers. He watched. He listened. He absorbed everything. By mid-morning, the energy of the office shifted. Associates hurried with files, executives barked orders, and interns stumbled under the weight of Starbucks trays. Malcolm was invisible in plain sight. He rolled his cart past a group of brokers clustered near the conference room, pretending to scrub the baseboards while his ears picked up every word. "Heard Price's son is supposed to be in the picture," one said. "Please?" Another scoffed. "He's been overseas half his life. What does he know about Texas real estate?" "This company needs people who've been in the trenches." "And what trenches would that be?" the first asked with a smirk. "The trenches of long lunches and golf tournaments?" They laughed. Malcolm kept his face steady, but inside, the words lodged like small stones. He knew this wasn't just casual banter. It was an undercurrent, a bias that had been nurtured here for years. At noon, he slipped into the employee cafeteria. The line was long, and the chatter was louder than usual. He took a seat in the corner with a plain sandwich wrapped in foil. From that vantage point, he observed, Karen Doyle strutted in, ordering an intern to fetch her a salad, tossing her purse onto a chair as if it owned the table. Brent Lawson soon followed, shaking hands with junior associates, laughing too loudly, radiating confidence like it was cologne. But Malcolm's focus drifted elsewhere to the quieter corners. He noticed Emily Chen sitting alone, earbuds in, but her eyes drifted now and then to Karen. Emily's hands were neat on her lap, her posture tight, as if she wanted to speak but held herself back. That hesitation, Malcolm thought, said more than words. After lunch, he returned to his rounds. In one hallway, he found a small cluster of employees whispering. He slowed, pretending to adjust the mop handle. "I saw him yesterday," one whispered. Karen dumped coffee on him like it was nothing. "Yeah, but did you say anything?" another asked. The silence that followed was sharp. Finally, someone muttered, "No, I didn't want trouble." That silence spoke volumes. It was the silence that let rot spread. Malcolm marked their faces in his mind. Not to punish them, fear was real. After all, but to remind himself how culture sustained itself when good people stayed quiet. By late afternoon, his body was sore from the physical labor, but his mind was sharper than ever. He paused outside the executive boardroom. Inside, through the thick glass, he saw his father, Richard, seated at the head of the table. Silver hair, neat, suit impeccable. Richard was flanked by board members, each one dressed in the confidence of power. Malcolm couldn't hear their words, but he could read their body language. They leaned in when Brent spoke. They nodded when Karen brought in documents. They dismissed the voices of quieter members without a glance. It reminded Malcolm of why he was here. This wasn't just about firing a few arrogant employees. It was about resetting the compass of a company that had forgotten its own humanity. The sun dipped low as he finished his shift. On his way out, he noticed a maintenance worker struggling with a jammed service elevator. The man, older, Latino, sweat dampening his shirt, cursed under his breath as he tried to pry the door. Malcolm stepped forward. "Need a hand." The man looked startled, then nodded. Together, they forced the door back into alignment. "Thanks," the man said, breathing hard. "Name's Jorge, Malcolm," he replied simply. Jorge squinted. "First week." "Yeah." Jorge's expression softened. "It's rough here, man. Watch your back. People like us." He stopped himself, then shook his head. "Just don't expect fairness. Not in this building." Malcolm gave a small nod, his chest tightening at the phrase "people like us." He knew it too well. That evening, back in his apartment, he replayed the day's observations. The arrogance, the laughter, the silence, the fear, but also the flickers of conscience, Emily's hesitation, Jorge's quiet warning. He wrote them down in his journal. Tomorrow, the masks would fall. Tomorrow, the announcement would come. He would no longer be just the janitor, and the people who had mocked him, dismissed him, ignored him would face the weight of their choices. Malcolm closed his eyes, hearing his mother's voice again. "Respect is the foundation." He whispered back into the quiet, then let the foundation be rebuilt. The next morning, Malcolm entered the office carrying his mop bucket as if it were armor. The rhythm of his steps echoed in the lobby, mixing with the chatter of employees who rushed past him without acknowledgement. He was invisible again, just as he needed to be. Yet, beneath that disguise, his chest burned with anticipation. Tonight would be his last night as a janitor. Tomorrow. The curtain would rise, and everyone would see him for who he truly was. But before that moment, one final test of patience came. At 9:30, Brent Lawson stormed out of the executive wing, his tie crooked, his face red with irritation. "Where's the janitor?" he barked, his voice booming across the floor. Malcolm kept his head down, rolling his cart forward. "You," Brent snapped, pointing. "Conference room 3, coffee spill, and hurry up. We've got the investors' call in an hour, and we can't have stains on the carpet." Malcolm followed silently. When he arrived, he saw the mess was no accident. A full cup had been tipped deliberately, brown liquid spreading across the cream rug. The room was empty, but the malice was clear. He crouched, blotting the stain, each press of the rag grounding him in his resolve. Behind him, Brent leaned against the doorframe. "You know, my grandfather built this company from the ground up. Men like him, men like me, we keep this place running. Not people like you just clean up the mess." Malcolm felt the sting, but he stayed calm. He reminded himself the janitor was still his cover. The CEO would have his turn. At noon, Karen Doyle cornered him in the hallway. "You missed a trash bin on the 6th floor," she sneered. "Do you even know how to do your job? Don't think because you're new, you get a free pass. Around here, mistakes get punished fast." She jabbed a finger at his chest. "One more slip, and I'll make sure you're out the door." Malcolm's jaw tightened, but he only nodded, understood. Karen smirked, satisfied, and walked away. She didn't notice the calm steel in his eyes. The breaking point came that evening. The office had quieted down. Most employees gone, leaving only the faint buzz of fluorescent lights and the hum of cleaning equipment. Malcolm was polishing the lobby floor when Amanda Keller, a senior associate known for her sharp suits and sharper tongue, walked in with two friends. They were laughing, heels clicking against marble. "Look at him," Amanda said loudly, pointing at Malcolm. "Still here after dark, pushing that mop like it's his crown. Bet he thinks hard work's gonna buy him a ticket upstairs." Her friends chuckled. One added, "Maybe he should be grateful. At least he has a job." Amanda's voice cut sharper. "People like him should know their place." The words sliced through the air, louder than the buzz of the lights. Malcolm froze. His hand gripped the mop handle until his knuckles widened. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting Amanda's. For a moment, silence filled the lobby. Her laughter faltered under his gaze, though she masked it quickly with a scoff. "What? Don't tell me you're offended." Malcolm inhaled deeply, steadying himself. Then he said quietly, "One day, Ms. Keller, you'll wish you had chosen different words." Amanda rolled her eyes. Threats from the janitor. "Please." She swept past him, her heels striking the marble like gavel blows. Malcolm remained rooted, his heart pounding. That was it. The line had been crossed too many times. Tomorrow wasn't just about leadership, it was about justice. Later that night, back in his apartment, he replayed every insult, every sneer, every silence, Brent's arrogance, Karen's threats, Amanda's cruelty, and the quiet hesitation of people like Emily Chen, the warning from Jorge. The company was split into two camps, those who had used power to belittle, and those who had stayed quiet in fear. Malcolm stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He thought of his mother again, her tired hands, her unwavering dignity. He thought of the promise he made as a boy to build something better, something where people like her wouldn't be treated as shadows. Tomorrow was that chance. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from his father. Richard. Big day tomorrow. The board is ready. I hope you are too. Malcolm typed a short reply, I'm ready. But after setting the phone down, he whispered into the quiet, ready to tear down what you let grow. He knew this wasn't just about revealing himself as CEO. It was about confronting a culture his father had allowed to fester, intentionally or not. It would be messy, it would be painful, and some would hate him for it. But when the dust settled, Harbor and Stone would stand on a new foundation or not at all. The clock ticked past midnight. Malcolm closed his eyes, letting exhaustion pull him under. Tomorrow, the janitor would disappear, and the world inside that glass tower would never look the same. The boardroom smelled faintly of leather and cologne, a place built for power. At 9 sharp, the directors of Harbor Stone Realty took their seats around the long mahogany table. Laptops opened, papers shuffled, whispers floated between men in tailored suits and women in crisp blazers. At the head of the table sat Richard Price, dignified in his navy suit, a man whose very presence commanded attention. Thank you all for being here. Richard began, his voice steady but edged with anticipation. Today, we announce the future of Harbor and Stone. Malcolm wasn't at the table. Not yet. He stood just outside, still in his janitor's uniform, mop leaning against the wall, listening as if he were invisible. Karen Doyle brushed past him with a dismissive glance. Brent Lawson strutted into the room with Amanda Keller on his arm, both whispering eagerly about promotions. Emily Chen lingered near the door, her hands clasped tightly. Inside, Richard cleared his throat. For nearly 4 decades, this company has grown into one of the largest real estate firms in the country. But we cannot cling to the past. We must embrace the future. And so, I am stepping down as CEO. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, eyes widening. Brent leaned back in his chair, smirking, already certain the spotlight would fall on him. Karen's lips curved into a satisfied smile. Amanda's chin tilted higher with expectation. Richard lifted a hand, and the murmurs stilled. The next CEO will be someone who knows this company not just from the top floor, but from the ground up. Someone who understands the struggles of those who make this place run, and who has the vision to rebuild where we have failed. He paused, then gestured to the doorway. Allow me to introduce your new leader, Malcolm Price. The room froze. Heads turned toward the janitor leaning against the wall. Malcolm stepped forward, calm and steady, the fluorescent light catching the quiet strength in his eyes. Karen scoffed, "Him, that's a joke." Brent barked a laugh. "Richard, you can't be serious. He's the janitor." Amanda's face drained of color. She remembered his words the night before one day. "You'll wish you had chosen different words." Richard's tone was unshakable. "He's not just the janitor. He's my son. He is the majority shareholder. And starting today, he is your CEO." Silence thundered in the room. Malcolm stepped to the head of the table, taking the seat his father vacated. He didn't slam his hands or raise his voice. Instead, he set his palms flat on the polished wood and looked each board member in the eye. "I've spent the last 2 weeks working here undercover. I've seen how this company treats people it deems unimportant. I've heard the laughter, the insults, the silence, and I want you to know I remember every face, every word." Karen flushed, her eyes darting to the floor. Brent shifted uncomfortably, his smirk fading. Amanda's hands trembled slightly in her lap. But I've also seen glimmers of decency. Malcolm continued, a secretary who wanted to speak but stayed silent out of fear. A maintenance worker who warned me to watch my back. Those moments matter. They tell me this culture can change, but only if we have the courage to face what's broken. He leaned back, his voice firm but calm. Today, that change begins. Richard stood quietly in the corner, watching his son with something like pride, but also unease. This wasn't the gentle passing of a torch he had imagined. This was fire sweeping through a field of dry grass. Brent finally found his voice. This is outrageous. With all due respect, Malcolm, you don't have the experience to lead this company. You've been gone. We're the ones who've kept it alive. Malcolm's eyes didn't waver. Alive, yes, but at what cost? A company that thrives on arrogance, fear, and silence isn't alive, it's rotten. And you, Brent, have been feeding that rot. Gasps rippled through the room. Brent's face reddened, but before he could respond, Malcolm turned to Karen. As for you, Miss Doyle, you've mistaken cruelty for authority. Leadership built on intimidation has no place here. Karen stammered. It was just discipline. No, Malcolm cut in, his voice still even but sharp as glass. It was humiliation, and it ends today. Amanda shifted in her seat, her voice tight. Are we all supposed to pretend you didn't deceive us, that you didn't lie about who you are? Malcolm met her gaze. Deception. No. Observation. I wanted to see this company unfiltered, and what I saw was a truth you can't cover with glass towers and glossy reports. I saw how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. Amanda swallowed hard, the echo of her own words. People like him should know their place seemed to hang in the air. The boardroom was silent. No one dared laugh now. No one dared dismiss him. Malcolm let the silence stretch, then spoke softly, but with gravity. Tomorrow, some of you will no longer have a place in this company. I don't make that choice lightly, but I make it with clarity. Harbor Stone will not be built on disrespect. It will be rebuilt on dignity. And if that costs us comfortable habits, so be it. His words landed like stones in a still pond, rippling through every corner of the room. Richard finally stepped forward. You've heard your CEO. This is the direction of Harbor Stone, one by one. Board members nodded, some in conviction, others in fear. The tide had shifted. Malcolm rose from his chair, his voice calm but final. The janitor is gone. The CEO is here, and everything changes now. The morning sun poured through the high windows of Harbor Stone's headquarters, washing the lobby in a pale glow. Employees shuffled in with their coffee cups, whispering nervously about yesterday's shocking announcement. The janitor had become the CEO. Those who had mocked him now avoided eye contact, and those who had stayed silent walked with their heads down, afraid their silence would be remembered. The air was thick with unease. Malcolm Price arrived not in his uniform but in a tailored charcoal suit, simple yet commanding. He moved through the building with quiet authority. Eyes followed him. Whispers followed too, but no one dared stop him. He carried no mop, no bucket, only a leather notebook tucked under his arm. At 10 o'clock sharp, he called an all-staff meeting in the glass-walled atrium. Hundreds of employees gathered, their voices buzzing like restless bees. Karen Doyle stood stiffly near the back. Brent Lawson tried to mask his unease with a forced grin. and Amanda Keller shifted uncomfortably in her expensive heels. Emily Chen stood alone by a column, clutching her notebook, her face pale but her eyes fixed on Malcolm. Jorge, the maintenance worker, had slipped in quietly, blending into the crowd yet watching intently. When Malcolm stepped onto the small platform, the hum fell silent. His presence filled the space, not with bluster but with a calm gravity that demanded attention. "Yesterday," he began, his voice even, measured, "you learned the truth about me. For 2 weeks, I walked these halls as a janitor. I scrubbed your floors, emptied your bins, polished your glass. I did the work many of you never notice. And in that work, I noticed you. I saw who you are when you think no one is watching. Some of you revealed kindness, some revealed fear, and others revealed something darker." The room shifted uneasily. Karen's lips pressed tight, Brent's arms crossed defensively, Amanda's chin lifted as if to challenge. Malcolm continued. "This company has been successful in numbers, yes, profits, growth, skyscrapers, but numbers lie if they're built on a rotten foundation. Harbor Stone has tolerated arrogance, cruelty, and silence. That ends today." He opened his notebook and read aloud, each word deliberate. "Brent Lawson, Amanda Keller, Karen Doyle, step forward." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Brent's grin vanished. Amanda's face drained of color. Karen's fists clenched at her sides. Slowly, the three of them moved to the front, their footsteps echoing in the hushed atrium. Malcolm closed the notebook, his eyes locked on Brent first. "You pride yourself on loyalty. Brent, you called yourself the backbone of this company. But loyalty is not arrogance. Leadership is not belittling those beneath you. When you laughed at the struggles of others, when you spoke of who belongs and who does not, you revealed yourself." Brent's voice wavered as he tried to interrupt. "I've given years to this place, and in those years," Malcolm cut in, steady but sharp, "you fed the rot. You're dismissed effective immediately." Brent's face turned crimson. He looked around the crowd, searching for support, but saw only lowered eyes. He stormed out, his footsteps heavy with rage. Malcolm turned to Karen. "You called your cruelty discipline. You poured coffee on a man's shirt and demanded he clean it. You used your position not to guide, but to humiliate. You confused fear with respect. That ends today. You are terminated." Karen's jaw trembled. She opened her mouth, then shut it again, realizing there was nothing to defend. She walked out slowly, her heels clicking like a drumbeat of defeat. Finally, Malcolm faced Amanda. Her eyes burned with defiance, but beneath it flickered fear. "You told me people like me should know their place. You laughed as if dignity were disposable. You saw a man working late at night and treated him as if his humanity was worth less than yours. Those words will echo in this building long after today, but not with your presence. You are dismissed." Amanda's lips quivered. For once, no sharp retort came. She turned and walked out, the silence of the crowd pressing down on her shoulders. Malcolm let the silence settle. Then he looked out over the sea of faces. This is not about vengeance. This is about responsibility. For too long, this company rewarded those who climbed by stepping on others. No more. From this day forward, respect is not optional. It is the foundation. The crowd was still, hanging on his every word. He gestured to Emily Chen. "Emily, come forward." Emily hesitated, then stepped onto the platform, her face pale but her posture straighter than before. "You may not have spoken up when you wanted to," Malcolm said gently, "but I saw the conflict in your eyes. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. You represent the conscience this company needs. Starting today, you will be promoted to Office Operations Manager, and you will help me build a culture where silence is not the only option." Emily's eyes widened, her hands trembling as the crowd murmured in surprise. Tears welled, but she managed a quiet, "Thank you." Malcolm turned to the employees once more. "Some of you are afraid now. Afraid your silence will be remembered. Afraid your laughter will condemn you. Let me be clear. This is not about punishing fear. This is about ending cruelty. If you're willing to change, to choose dignity over arrogance, there is a place for you here. If not, the door is open." Jorge, standing at the back, felt a lump rise in his throat. For years, he had accepted disrespect as part of the job, but today he saw something shift not just in the company, but in himself. Malcolm closed his notebook. Harbor Stone is not just a company. It is a reflection of who we choose to be. And today, we choose better. The atrium erupted not in applause, not yet, but in something deeper. A collective breath released, as if the building itself had exhaled years of silence. The day after the reckoning, the atmosphere inside Harbor Stone felt entirely different. The air was no longer filled with smug laughter or whispered cruelty, but with unease and reflection. The atrium, where Malcolm Price had stood tall, now carried an invisible weight. Everyone remembered the look in his eyes when he spoke about respect, and no one could forget the silence that followed when Karen, Brent, and Amanda walked out for the last time. Malcolm arrived early that morning. Not for show, but because it was his habit. He liked to see the building before it was awake, to feel the quiet before the buzz of the day. He walked through the lobby where the marble floor gleamed under the soft lights. The cleaning crew, led by Jorge, was just finishing their shift. Jorge paused, mop in hand, unsure whether to step aside or greet him. "Good morning, Jorge," Malcolm said warmly, as if nothing about his title had changed. Jorge blinked, surprised. "Good morning, sir. I wasn't sure what to call you." "Malcolm is fine," he replied with a small smile. "Titles don't make a man. Actions do." The words sank deep into Jorge's chest. For the first time in years, he felt seen not as invisible labor, but as part of something bigger. By mid-morning, Malcolm had called a smaller gathering with the department heads and key staff who had stayed silent during the 2 weeks he worked undercover. They shuffled into the boardroom uneasily. Some looked ashamed, others defensive, but most carried a quiet question. Would their silence cost them their place here? Malcolm stood at the head of the table. His father, Richard, seated off to the side, watching. Emily Chen, freshly promoted, sat near Malcolm, her notebook open, her hand steady despite the nervous glances others threw her way. "I called you here," Malcolm began, "because I want to speak about silence. Injustice thrives when good people say nothing. Many of you saw what was happening. You heard the words, you saw the humiliations, and you chose not to speak. I need to know why." The room was heavy with discomfort. Finally, one man cleared his throat. Daniel Harper, head of acquisitions, shifted in his seat. "It wasn't that we agreed with what Karen or Brent did. It's just, we didn't want to be targets." Speaking up felt dangerous. Malcolm nodded slowly. "Fear is real. I don't dismiss it. But every time you choose silence, you give cruelty permission. That is how cultures rot from the top. Yes, but also from the quiet corners where people watch and do nothing. Another manager, Sophia Martinez, raised her hand hesitantly. I thought about saying something once, but when I saw how Amanda mocked a junior analyst just for asking a question, I thought, if they'll do that to her, what will they do to me? Malcolm leaned forward, his voice firm yet calm. Do you see the pattern fear kept you silent, and silence fed their power? This is not about condemning you. It's about breaking the cycle. Richard Price, who had remained silent until now, spoke. His voice was deep but tinged with shame. My failure as a leader was trust in numbers more than culture. I looked at profit margins and thought the company was strong, but I ignored the whispers, the complaints, the rumors of bias. My silence gave permission too. The room turned toward him. It was startling for many to hear the once untouchable founder admit fault. Malcolm straightened. Accountability begins today. For those who laughed at cruelty, there will be consequences. For those who stayed silent, there will be expectations. You are not fired for silence, but moving forward, silence will not be tolerated. If you see disrespect and do nothing, you're part of the problem. A murmur spread through the room. Some shifted uncomfortably, but others, like Sophia, looked relieved. Emily, who had sat quietly, finally spoke. I was silent too. I wanted to speak, but fear held me. I don't deserve this promotion unless I earn it by doing better. And I will. Malcolm looked at her with respect. That honesty is what this company needs. He then outlined a new program. We will create what I call the integrity line, a channel where any employee can report disrespect or discrimination directly to leadership without fear of retaliation. Reports will be reviewed within 48 hours. There will be transparency. We will measure not just profit, but dignity. If you cannot align with that, this is not the place for you. The room was silent again, but this time it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of realization. After the meeting, Malcolm retreated to his office, a room he had avoided until now. The desk was immaculate, the view sweeping across the city skyline. He stood there for a long while, hands clasped behind his back, wrestling with his thoughts. His mind replayed the moments of humiliation he endured. The sting of being called boy, the coffee splattering across a table, the smirks that told him he didn't belong. He remembered his mother's voice, soft yet unyielding, telling him when he was a boy, never let them convince you that your worth is less than theirs. He whispered to the empty room, I didn't. Mama, I didn't. There was a knock at the door. It was Emily, hesitant. Sir, may I? Of course, Malcolm said. She stepped inside. I wanted to thank you again, not just for the promotion, but for giving us all a chance to change. Yesterday, I thought you might fire half the building, but you didn't. You drew a line without burning everything down. Malcolm smiled faintly. Revenge is easy. Emily, building something better is harder, but it lasts longer. Her eyes softened, and she nodded before leaving. When evening fell, Malcolm walked through the lobby once more. He found Jorge finishing his shift. Long day, Malcolm asked. Jorge chuckled. Long. Yes, but for the first time, it feels like it matters. Malcolm clasped his shoulder. It always mattered. Now others will see it too. As he left the building, the city lights flickered on outside, illuminating the glass tower of Harbor and Stone. inside. Employees sat at their desks reflecting not just on their jobs, but on their choices. The reckoning had ended, but the real work, the rebuilding, had just begun. 2 days after the firings, Malcolm Price faced a new test, one far less visible than the public reckoning in the atrium, but no less dangerous. The board of Harbor Stone had called an emergency meeting. Not everyone was pleased with his actions. Some directors worried about disruption. Others feared investors might interpret the sudden terminations as instability. The boardroom was polished, its long mahogany table gleaming under recessed lights. The city skyline stretched wide behind glass walls. Malcolm entered in his calm, deliberate stride, Richard Price walking at his side like a sentinel. The directors were already seated men and women who had served Harbor Stone for decades, dressed in tailored suits, their faces carefully composed. The chair of the board, Thomas Caldwell, cleared his throat. He was tall, silver-haired, and spoke with the practiced weight of someone who had never been challenged. "Malcolm, we appreciate your energy and your ideals, but the sudden firing of 3 senior figures has rattled this company. Investors are calling. Clients are asking questions. Can you explain what your long-term plan is, or are we meant to assume your leadership will be guided by sentiment?" Malcolm set his notebook down, folding his hands on the table. "Not sentiment, Mr. Caldwell, integrity. Those 3 didn't fall because of personal disagreements. They fell because they poisoned the culture. If we build wealth on arrogance and cruelty, it will collapse. I saw it with my own eyes." A director named Linda Watkins, one of the few who had long advocated for ethics in leadership, leaned forward. "I believe Malcolm has a point. Culture drives performance. Toxicity festers in silence. He's right to act decisively." But another director, Gerald Henshaw, shook his head. "With respect. Linda, numbers drive performance. If our clients leave because of this spectacle, we won't have the luxury of discussing culture." Richard, silent until now, spoke with a steady tone. "Clients won't leave because we chose dignity. They will stay because they trust us. I've built this empire by chasing profit, yes, but profit without respect rots from the inside. I failed to see it. My son did not." The room shifted. Some directors exchanged glances. Caldwell tapped a finger on the table. "Still, Malcolm, perception is everything. Videos are circulating of you dismissing employees in front of the entire staff. You may think it's justice, but investors may see chaos. Why didn't you handle it quietly?" Malcolm's eyes locked onto his. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Because secrecy is how rot spreads. Quiet discipline is how leaders hide what they're unwilling to confront openly. I wanted every employee to see that cruelty has consequences. No one will doubt where I stand, and investors who value only silence are not the investors we need." The room fell quiet at that. Some directors leaned back, considering. Others frowned, unconvinced. Then Linda Watkins asked, "What is your plan to rebuild?" Malcolm opened his notebook. "First, the integrity line already in motion. Second, mandatory leadership training, not on profits but on respect, decision-making, and accountability. Third, quarterly audits of culture, just like financial audits. Fourth, a new program that will redefine what success means here. We will measure not only deals closed but also trust built. The world is watching. We can either become an example or a cautionary tale." The board murmured, some skeptical, some intrigued. Caldwell raised an eyebrow. And what if this experiment fails? What if we lose clients? Malcolm didn't flinch. Then we lose the ones who cannot stand alongside integrity. But I'll tell you what we won't lose. We won't lose our soul. The words landed like a hammer. Silence followed, broken only when Richard leaned back, pride flickering across his face. After the meeting, Caldwell lingered, pulling Malcolm aside. His voice lowered. "You have conviction. Malcolm, I'll grant you that. But conviction makes enemies. Be ready. The old guard doesn't fall quietly." Malcolm met his gaze. Neither does truth. Outside the boardroom, Emily Chen waited nervously. She'd been asked to sit in as an observer, though she hadn't spoken. When Malcolm emerged, she exhaled. How did it go? He offered a faint smile, like any battle worth fighting, messy, but necessary. She bit her lip. Some of them looked hostile. "They are," Malcolm said softly, "because power is shifting. But this isn't about them. It's about the hundreds of people in this building who need to know that dignity matters more than arrogance." That evening, as the city lights flickered on, Malcolm sat alone in his office. The skyline was beautiful, yet he found himself staring at the reflection in the glass more than the view outside. He remembered his mother again, the woman whose absence still weighed heavy, the one who had taught him to hold dignity close even when the world tried to strip it away. "Would you be proud of me?" he whispered. "Or would you tell me I'm walking into a storm I'm not ready for a moment?" Doubt gripped him. But then he remembered the look on Jorge's face, the relief in Emily's eyes, the shift in the silence of the staff. He breathed deeply and whispered again, firmer this time. "I'm ready." The following morning, Malcolm arrived early at Harbor Stone. The building was quieter than usual, as though the echo of yesterday's boardroom clash still lingered in the air. He paused at the lobby, looking up at the glass ceiling that spilled sunlight across the marble floor. For the first time since his undercover journey began, the space felt different. Not just grand, but vulnerable, like a house stripped bare, waiting to be rebuilt. As he rode the elevator to the 14th floor, he overheard fragments of conversation from employees who had entered after him. Their words carried unease, curiosity, and something he hadn't heard before, hope. "Do you think he really meant it?" "That we'll be treated better now," one whispered. "I don't know, but I've never seen anyone stand up to Gerald or Marissa like that." Another replied, "Not even Richard Price himself." Malcolm stayed quiet, listening. It struck him that the staff didn't yet know how to believe in the change. They were testing its reality, feeling its edges. When he stepped off the elevator, eyes turned toward him. Normally, staff would avert their gaze when the CEO walked past. This time, people lingered. Some nodded respectfully, others offered tentative smiles. The silence was no longer fear, it was attention. Emily Chen approached him with a tablet in hand. She had been working non-stop since her promotion. "Mr. Price, I've compiled the first round of anonymous submissions through the integrity line. Would you like to see them now?" "Yes," he said. "Let's read them together." They sat in his office, scrolling through dozens of reports. Some were minor complaints, poor communication, favoritism in project assignments, but others were deeper racial slurs whispered in hallways, promotions denied despite stellar performance, junior staff pressured into silence when they raised concerns. Malcolm leaned back, exhaling slowly. These aren't just reports, Emily. These are wounds, and if wounds aren't treated, they infect the whole body. Emily nodded, her eyes heavy with recognition. I used to think no one cared enough to listen. Now they're writing as if they believe something might actually change. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock. It was Jorge Martinez, the custodian Malcolm had defended weeks earlier. He stood nervously in the doorway, clutching his cap in both hands. "Mr. Price, I don't want to take your time. I just wanted to say thank you. Nobody ever stood up for me before." Malcolm rose and crossed the room, shaking Jorge's hand firmly. "You don't need to thank me. Jorge, you deserved respect from the beginning. My only regret is that it took me this long to see it with my own eyes." Jorge's face softened, and, for the first time, he smiled fully. "Well, now everybody sees, and that's what matters." That afternoon, Malcolm held a company-wide town hall in the atrium. The last time he'd stood there, it had been to fire employees in a public reckoning. Today was different. The crowd filled every corner, assistants, managers, agents, custodians. The hum of voices quieted as Malcolm stepped to the podium. "I know the last few days have been unsettling," he began, his voice calm but carrying weight. "Some of you may wonder if this change is real, or if it will fade once the headlines do. Let me assure you it will not fade. This company will no longer tolerate arrogance, cruelty, or bias, not in whispers, not in meetings, not in policies. We are building something new, together." A hand went up in the crowd. To his surprise, it was Angela Moore, a mid-level leasing agent known for her sharp wit. What happens if the people at the top don't change? We've seen promises before. They make speeches, then go back to the old ways. Malcolm didn't deflect. That's a fair question. "Angela, here's the answer. If anyone, at any level, refuses to change whether they sit in the mailroom or the boardroom, they will not stay at Harbor Stone. Period." The room erupted in murmurs, some skeptical, some energized. Angela nodded, folding her arms, as though testing his resolve. Later, in the break area, Malcolm overheard conversations again. This time, the tone was shifting. A young analyst whispered, "Do you think he'll actually keep that promise?" And his colleague answered, "He already proved he's not afraid to fire the untouchables." Maybe this time is different. But not everyone was convinced. In the executive suite, Gerald Henshaw seethed. His voice carried down the hallway as he spoke to another senior manager. "This boy thinks he can tear down decades of order. He'll regret humiliating us." Malcolm, walking past, caught the words but didn't stop. He had learned enough by now to know culture doesn't change without resistance, and resistance often grows loudest right before it breaks. That evening, he stayed late again. The building emptied around him until only the hum of the HVAC system remained. He opened his notebook and wrote one question across the page. "How do I turn fragile hope into unshakable belief?" He stared at it, knowing the answer would not come quickly. It would be built day by day, choice by choice, until hope hardened into trust. Before leaving, he walked the quiet hallways one more time. In the janitorial closet, he saw Jorge stocking supplies. In a small office, Emily worked under the glow of her desk lamp. In the far corner, Angela debated passionately with two colleagues about fairness in commissions. These were the voices he wanted to amplify, the ones who had been drowned out for too long. Malcolm paused, whispering to himself, This isn't about firing employees. It's about firing fear. By the end of the week, news of Malcolm Price's decisive actions had spilled far beyond the walls of Harbor and Stone. Local newspapers ran headlines about a black CEO holding his own company accountable. Talk shows debated whether his public firings were courageous or reckless. Social media lit up with clips from the town hall and whispers about the integrity line. But the most telling feedback didn't come from media pundits. It came from the community Harbor and Stone claimed to serve. One Saturday morning, Malcolm attended a neighborhood meeting in Newark, held inside a modest community center that Harbor and Stone had once promised to help renovate. The paint peeled on the walls, the air smelled faintly of dust and old wood, and the folding chairs squeaked under the weight of weary residents. Dozens of people sat facing the small stage, their arms crossed, eyes sharp with suspicion. When Malcolm stepped up to speak, the room didn't cheer or clap. It fell silent, waiting. He adjusted the microphone, his voice steady. "I came here today not as a CEO, but as a neighbor. Harbor and Stone has built properties across this city, but somewhere along the way, we stopped listening. We promised opportunity. Too often, we delivered only displacement. I want to change that. But change doesn't start with me telling you what you need. It starts with me hearing your voices." A man in the back stood up. He was tall, gray at the temples, his work shirt stained with paint. "Name's Robert Jenkins. I've lived in this neighborhood 30 years. Harbor and Stone bought up half the block. My rent doubled. My daughter had to move back in with me because she couldn't afford her own place. You say you want to listen, but where were you when we begged for help last year?" Malcolm didn't dodge the question. He looked Robert in the eye. "I wasn't here, and that was my failure. But I'm here now, and I intend to rebuild trust, brick by brick." From the front row, an elderly woman with a cane raised her hand. Her voice trembled but carried force. "They said they'd make this center safe for our kids. That was 5 years ago. Look at it, broken windows, no heat in winter. Why should we believe you?" Now Malcolm stepped down from the stage, walking toward her slowly. He crouched slightly so their eyes were level. "Ma'am, if I have to be here every week with a hammer in my hand, we will fix this place. I can't erase the years you were ignored, but I can promise you won't be ignored again." The woman studied him, then nodded once, not approval, but recognition of sincerity. Other voices followed, angry, hurt, skeptical. A young mother spoke of predatory lease terms. A shop owner described being priced out. A teenager asked why luxury condos mattered more than playgrounds. Malcolm listened to each one, taking notes in his worn leather notebook. He didn't argue. He didn't interrupt. He let the weight of their words sink into the room. When the last speaker finished, Malcolm stood again. "I won't ask for your trust today. Trust is earned, not demanded. But I will show you something Harbor and Stone is changing from the inside out. I've already removed leaders who disrespected not only our employees but the people we're supposed to serve. And, starting Monday, we will launch a community council made up not of executives, but of you. Every development we plan will go through this council first. Your voices will guide our decisions. That is my promise." The room buzzed with cautious conversation. Robert crossed his arms but gave a small nod. The elderly woman leaned on her cane and said softly, "We'll see." After the meeting, Malcolm lingered to shake hands. Some offered polite words, others walked past him without a glance. But one teenager, The same boy who had spoken about playgrounds stopped him. "Mr. Price, if you're serious, I'll join that council. My name's Darius. I want kids to have somewhere to play." Malcolm smiled, extending his hand. "Then you'll be our first member. Darius, driving back to the city." Malcolm sat in silence. Richard, who had joined him for the meeting, finally spoke. "You handled yourself well. You didn't promise what you couldn't deliver. That matters." Malcolm stared out the window at the passing neighborhoods. It's not enough to clean the inside of the house if the foundation is cracked. We can't just change Harbor Stone for employees. We have to change it for the people we affect. That evening, Emily Chen called. Her voice carried both urgency and excitement. "Mr. Price, we've been flooded with messages since the community meeting. Tenants are asking how to join the council. Local nonprofits want to partner. Even the press is framing it as a turning point." Malcolm leaned back in his chair, exhaustion mixing with a quiet sense of momentum. "That's good. But Emily, let's be clear, the council isn't for show. If they say we're wrong, we stop. If they say we've hurt them, we listen. This can't be decoration, it has to be power." She hesitated, then said, "I believe you, and I think more of them will, too." Later that night, Malcolm sat at his kitchen table, alone. The city hummed outside, but the house was still. He poured himself a glass of water and opened his notebook again. On the page he wrote 3 words in bold strokes: "Listen, act, prove." He whispered them aloud, letting each word settle into his bones. Listen, act, prove. Because promises were fragile, only proof would last. Monday began with tension thick as fog. Malcolm arrived at Harbor Stone before sunrise, his steps echoing in the empty hallways. He sensed something brewing. Rumors had reached him over the weekend. Gerald Henshaw and a few allies were maneuvering behind closed doors, quietly undermining his reforms. The old guard wasn't surrendering, they were plotting. By mid-morning, confirmation came. Emily Chen rushed into his office, tablet in hand, her face pale. "Mr. Price, you need to see this." An anonymous email blast went out to several clients and investors overnight. It accuses you of destabilizing the company, calls your leadership reckless, and urges clients to withdraw contracts. It's signed concerned employees. But the language, it sounds like Gerald. Malcolm skimmed the text, each line dripping with venom. The CEO has humiliated loyal leaders. He parades his so-called integrity, but his choices threaten your investments. Do you want to tie your future to his experiment? He closed the tablet slowly. So this is how they want to fight. Emily's voice trembled. Should we issue a formal denial? No, Malcolm replied firmly. We don't feed lies with panic. We respond with truth. Schedule a meeting with our top clients. I'll speak to them directly. By noon, the conference room was filled with some of Harbor Stone's most valuable partners, developers, financiers, community leaders. They sat stiffly, scrolling through their phones, whispers spreading like wildfire. Gerald Henshaw was there, too, standing at the back with his arms crossed, wearing a faint smirk. Malcolm entered without notes, his expression calm but resolute. He began simply, "You've received messages meant to frighten you. I won't waste your time denying what you've read. Instead, I'll tell you what we're doing." He outlined the integrity line, the leadership training, the community council, the cultural audits. He spoke of accountability, not as an experiment, but as the company's survival strategy. If Harbor Stone is only about profit, we will eventually collapse. But if Harbor and Stone is about trust, respect, and community, then our foundation will outlast any storm. For a moment, silence hung in the room. Then Robert Jenkins, yes, the same man from Newark, stood up from his seat at the end of the table. Malcolm hadn't expected him to be there, but the community council had been invited as observers. Robert's voice was gravelly, but steady. I've been one of Harbor and Stone's harshest critics. I've seen them take more than they give. But last week, this man showed up at our community center. He listened. He didn't make excuses. He promised change, and he's already started. You can call that reckless. I call it leadership. Murmurs rippled across the room. Gerald's smirk faded. Another voice joined Darius, the teenager council member who had been allowed to attend as a symbolic gesture. His tone was youthful but fiery. For the first time, someone at the top is asking what people like me think. I don't care about balance sheets. I care that my little cousins will have a safe place to play. If he's reckless for caring about us, then I hope the whole industry gets reckless. The room shifted. Some investors nodded. Some leaned forward with interest. Gerald's eyes narrowed, jaw tight. After the meeting, several clients approached Malcolm, shaking his hand, expressing cautious support. One whispered, "We've been waiting for someone to talk about values, not just returns. You might be onto something." But not everyone was pleased. Gerald cornered Malcolm outside the conference room. His voice was low, venomous. "You think you've won them over. This isn't over, boy. You may have your father's name, but you don't have his ruthlessness, and that will be your downfall." Malcolm didn't flinch. "You're right, Gerald. I don't have his ruthlessness. I have something stronger, his lessons. And one of those lessons is this: fear builds empires that crumble. Respect builds empires that last." For the first time, Gerald had no retort. He turned sharply, storming down the hallway. That evening, Malcolm gathered Emily, Jorge, Angela, and a few trusted staff in his office. The city lights glittered beyond the windows as he spoke. Today was a turning point. The old guard is desperate. They'll try again, but so will we. And we won't win by fighting on their terms. We'll win by proving, day after day, that respect is more powerful than fear. Angela Moore, ever skeptical, leaned back in her chair. And what if respect doesn't pay the bills? Malcolm met her gaze. Then we'll create a way for it to pay the bills. Because if this industry can't value people and profit at the same time, then it doesn't deserve to survive. The room fell silent, but not with doubt, with thought. For the first time, Malcolm felt the stirrings of something deeper than compliance. He felt belief. Later that night, alone in his office, he let the exhaustion wash over him. His reflection in the glass looked older, wearier, but beneath the fatigue was a spark he hadn't seen before, a quiet certainty. He whispered the words he had written days earlier, almost like a prayer. Listen, act, prove. And for the first time, he believed that Harbor and Stone just might survive the storm. The next morning dawned crisp and bright. But Malcolm Price carried the weight of the night before. The sabotage, the confrontation with Gerald Henshaw, the fragile flicker of trust from clients and community, it all swirled inside him. Yet, as he walked into Harbor and Stone, he felt steadier than he had in weeks. He knew storms weren't signs of failure. They were proof that something real was shifting. In the atrium, dozens of employees had gathered. It wasn't a protest or a planned meeting. It was spontaneous. They stood in clusters, murmuring among themselves, eyes turning to Malcolm as he entered. He slowed his pace, unsure what awaited him. Then Angela Moore stepped forward, holding a folded sheet of paper. "We wrote this," she said, her voice steady but tinged with something new respect. "It's from us, the employees. We want you to hear it." Malcolm nodded. "Go ahead." Angela unfolded the paper and read aloud. "We, the staff of Harbor Stone, have worked under fear, silence, and neglect for too long. We've seen colleagues dismissed, voices ignored, communities harmed. But in recent weeks, we've also seen something else: accountability, fairness, and hope. We commit to building this company alongside leadership that values us not as tools, but as people. We stand ready to prove that integrity is not weakness, it is strength." The atrium filled with applause, tentative at first, then swelling until it echoed against the glass ceiling. Malcolm swallowed hard, moved beyond words. He realized this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of them choosing to believe in a new way forward. Later that day, the board convened again. This time, Malcolm entered with not only his father's support, but the voice of employees behind him. Gerald Henshaw, still bristling, launched into complaints about lost control and reckless leadership. But Linda Watkins countered sharply. "What I see is a company aligning its values with its actions. Clients are not leaving, they're calling to say they're impressed. Communities, once hostile, are asking to partner. The employees themselves are standing behind this CEO. Gerald, perhaps what you call reckless is simply a future you don't recognize." Richard Price spoke next, his voice firm, echoing with both age and conviction. "I built Harbor Stone on deals. Malcolm is rebuilding it on dignity. And dignity, I've learned too late, is the stronger foundation. I support his leadership fully." When the vote came, the board sided with Malcolm. Gerald scowled but could not stop it. The tide had turned. The old guard was broken. That evening, Malcolm hosted a joint event in the atrium. Employees, clients, and members of the community council gathered under one roof. The atmosphere hummed with cautious optimism. Jorge Martinez stood with other custodians, finally acknowledged as part of the company's backbone. Emily Chen spoke briefly about the integrity line, her voice carrying pride. Robert Jenkins mingled with executives, still skeptical but willing. And Darius, the teenager, handed out flyers for a new playground initiative, grinning with unshakable energy. When Malcolm finally addressed the crowd, his words were simple. Harbor Stone once stood as a symbol of walls between leaders and staff, between company and community, between profit and people. Today, we begin turning those walls into bridges. We will not be perfect. We will make mistakes, but we will listen. We will act. And we will prove that business built on dignity is business built to last. The room erupted in applause, not staged, not cautious, but alive. Later that night, long after the crowd dispersed, Malcolm stood alone in the atrium. He traced his hand along the cool marble pillar, remembering the first day he walked through undercover, ignored and underestimated. He remembered Jorge's quiet suffering, Emily's overlooked brilliance, Angela's biting skepticism, Robert's anger, Darius's hope. He remembered his father's shadow and the moment he chose not to walk in it, but alongside it, reshaping it. He whispered into the empty hall, "We're just beginning." And for the first time, the building didn't feel like a monument to arrogance. It felt like a home under renovation, its foundation stronger than ever. The story of Malcolm Price reminds us that true leadership is not measured by titles, wealth, or how many people bow when we enter a room. It is measured by how we treat others when no one is watching. Many of us, especially as we grow older, have seen how cruelty can hide in workplaces, families, even communities, not always through violence, but through silence and small acts of disrespect. Malcolm's journey shows that silence enables injustice, but respect transforms it.